Dracula was not just a myth. The real man was so terrifyingly brutal that even his own allies were scared of him. And the truth is way darker. Alright, so, you have seen the movies. You know the guy. Tall dark castle. Black cape. Fangs. Sleeps in a coffin. Scared of garlic. Turns into a bat. The whole thing. Dracula is one of the most famous fictional characters ever created and honestly, pretty cool as far as monsters go, but here is the thing, Dracula was not just made up out of thin air. There was a real man behind the myth. A real historical figure so brutal, so terrifying, so genuinely unhinged in the way he treated his enemies that even the people on his own side were scared to be around him, and when you find out the truth about who this guy actually was, what he did, why he did it, and how he lived and died, the vampire version starts to look kind of tame by comparison. That we are talking about Vlad III. Prince of Wallachia. Also known as Vlad Dracula. Also known, and this is the part that tells you everything you need to know, as Vlad the Impaler, yeah. That nickname was not an accident, this is the full story. The real story. And trust me, it hits way harder than any vampire movie ever could. Oncoming fist. Who was Vlad and where did he come from? Okay, so before we get into all the dark stuff, and there is a lot of dark stuff, we need to understand who this guy actually was and where he came from. Because his background is wild and it explains a lot about why he turned out the way he did. Vlad III was born around 1428 or 1431, historians are not totally sure of the exact date, in a region called Wallachia. Now Wallachia is in what is modern-day Romania. And back in the 1400s this was one of the most dangerous places in the entire world to be a ruler. You had the massive Ottoman Empire pushing in from the south trying to conquer everything in sight. You had Hungary pressing in from the north. You had rival nobles inside your own kingdom constantly plotting against you. Being the Prince of Wallachia was basically like being the target in a shooting range where everyone had guns and you were just standing there hoping for the best. His father was Vlad II, also called Vlad Dracul. Now that word Dracul is really important. In Romanian it means dragon. His father was a member of a knightly order called the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order set up to fight against the Ottoman Turks. So Vlad II was literally Vlad the Dragon, and that makes Vlad III, Vlad Dracula. Son of the Dragon, yeah. The name Dracula is not some spooky made-up vampire name. It literally just means son of the dragon. Which is actually kind of cool when you think about it, but here is where the story gets dark fast. When Vlad was around 12 or 13 years old his father made a political deal with the Ottoman Sultan Murad II. And as part of that deal, to prove his loyalty, Vlad II handed over 2 of his sons as hostages to the Ottomans. Those 2 sons were Vlad, the future Vlad the Impaler, and his younger brother Radu. Think about that for a second. Your own father hands you over to a foreign empire as a political guarantee. You are 12 years old. You are taken away from your home and kept as a prisoner, a high-class prisoner but a prisoner nonetheless, in the Ottoman court for years. Vlad stayed in Ottoman captivity for roughly 6 years. And those 6 years changed him completely. He was reportedly treated harshly. He was disciplined strictly. He watched how the Ottomans used fear and brutal punishment to maintain power and control. And somewhere in those 6 years something clicked in his brain: fear works. Brutal fear works even better. He was just a kid when he went in. He came out a completely different person. And the world was about to find out exactly what that meant. Flushed face. The betrayal that broke everything. So here is the thing. While young Vlad was sitting in Ottoman captivity learning some very dark lessons about power, things back home in Wallachia were falling apart fast. And what happened next is the kind of betrayal that would mess anyone up permanently. His father, Vlad II, was playing a very dangerous political game. He was supposed to be loyal to the Order of the Dragon and fight against the Ottomans. But he kept switching sides depending on who was winning at the time. He would support the Hungarians. Then support the Ottomans. Then back to the Hungarians. He was trying to survive by being useful to everyone. It did not work. In 1447, while Vlad was still in Ottoman captivity, his father was assassinated. And not just assassinated quietly. He was killed by Hungarian-backed forces led by a powerful man named John Hunyadi. They dragged Vlad II into a swamp and killed him there, and Vlad's older brother Mircea, the one who was supposed to inherit the throne, was captured. And they did not just kill him. They buried him alive. Some accounts say he was buried while still conscious. Just put in the ground and left there. Vlad found out about all of this while he was a prisoner of the very empire his father had been negotiating with, his father dead in a swamp. His brother buried alive. His throne taken. His country in chaos. And he was sitting in Ottoman captivity with nowhere to go and nobody to trust. That kind of trauma does not just go away. That kind of betrayal does not just fade with time. It burns into you. It rewires the way you see the world and the people in it, and when Vlad finally got out, when the Ottomans released him because they saw a chance to use him as a puppet ruler in Wallachia, he came back with something burning inside him that was never going to go out, that he remembered everything. Every person who betrayed his family. Every noble who stood by and did nothing. Every political player who chose their own survival over loyalty, and he had already decided what he was going to do about it. Revenge was not just on his mind. It was his entire plan. Fire. The first reign and the lesson he never forgot. Alright, so Vlad gets his first shot at ruling Wallachia in 1448. He is young. He is angry. He has been through things that would break most people. And he gets the throne, but only briefly. He only rules for about 2 months before he gets pushed out by political rivals and has to flee. 2 months. That is it, and that short humiliating first reign taught him something really important. Something that would define everything he did when he finally got power for real. Being soft gets you removed. Being weak gets you killed. The only way to hold power in a place like Wallachia, surrounded by enemies on every side, with nobles constantly scheming against you, was to make absolutely sure that everyone was more scared of what you would do to them than they were tempted by what they could gain by betraying you. He spent the next several years in exile. Moving around. Watching. Learning. Waiting for his moment. That he spent time in the court of John Hunyadi, yeah, the same guy who had his father killed. Politics in the 1400s was wild like that. You made deals with people you hated because survival came first. And Vlad was nothing if not a survivor. He watched how Hunyadi operated. How he used military force. How he maintained loyalty. How he dealt with enemies. And he filed all of it away. That he also never stopped thinking about Wallachia. About the nobles who had let his family be destroyed. About the Ottomans who had held him captive. About all the people who had treated his family as disposable pawns in their political games. In 1456 he finally got his chance. John Hunyadi died of plague. The political situation shifted. And Vlad moved. He took back the throne of Wallachia in 1456, and this time he was not going anywhere, and the first thing he did when he sat back down on that throne was start making a list, not a grocery list. Not a to-do list, but a list of everyone who was going to pay. Face with steam from nose. The Easter feast, the most infamous day of his reign. Okay, so this is the story that defines Vlad the Impaler more than almost anything else he ever did. And it is so wild and so cold-blooded that even after 600 years people still talk about it as one of the most calculated acts of political brutality in history. It is 1457. Vlad has just taken back his throne. And he absolutely knows, that the noble families of Wallachia were involved in his father's death and his family's downfall. These were the boyars. The powerful landowners. The people who were supposed to be loyal to the prince but who had been switching sides and plotting and scheming for decades. Vlad invited them all to Easter dinner, yeah. Easter dinner. A celebration. A feast. Come on over. Bring your families. Let us celebrate together, and they came. Because what were they going to do, say no to the prince? So there they all are. Sitting around the table. Eating. Drinking. Celebrating Easter like everything is totally fine, and then Vlad stood up that he looked around the room at all of them. All the noble families who had been there when his father died. All the boyars who had played political games with his family's lives. And he asked them, right there at the dinner table, how many princes had they seen come and go in their lifetimes. They answered honestly. Some said they had seen many princes rise and fall. Some gave numbers. They were basically bragging about how long they had survived while rulers came and went around them, and Vlad nodded. Then he had every single one of them arrested on the spot. The older nobles, the ones who were too old to be useful, were taken outside and impaled right there. Right at Easter. Right after dinner, the younger ones and their families were marched out of the city in their fine Easter clothes, all dressed up with nowhere to go, and forced to walk to a ruined castle called Poenary in the mountains. And when they got there, Vlad put them to work rebuilding it. With their bare hands. In their Easter clothes. Until those clothes literally rotted off their bodies. Many of them died from the work. From exhaustion. From exposure, Vlad got his castle rebuilt. And he eliminated an entire generation of the noble families who had betrayed his father. Cold. Calculated. Completely ruthless. That was not just revenge. That was a message to every single person left alive in Wallachia: cross me and this is what happens. No exceptions. No mercy. Not even on Easter. Flushed face. The impalement, why he did it and how bad it actually was. Alright, so we need to talk about the impalement thing. Because this is obviously the thing Vlad is most famous for and the thing that got him his nickname. And yeah, it is as bad as it sounds. Actually it is worse, but here is something really important that most people miss. Vlad did not just impale people because he was randomly cruel or because he enjoyed it for no reason. He used it as a very specific tool. A psychological weapon. A way of communicating power and dominance and absolute terror in a way that nobody could ignore or misunderstand. Impalement was not invented by Vlad. It had been used as a form of execution in various places for centuries. But Vlad took it to a level that nobody before or after him ever matched. The way it worked, and look, this is going to be uncomfortable but it is history and it is important. A long wooden stake was sharpened at one end and the person was placed on it. Vlad was reportedly very specific about the angle and sharpness of the stake. He wanted his victims to survive as long as possible. Because the longer they survived, the more visible they were. And visibility was the whole point, that he would set up these stakes in patterns. In rows. In circles. In formations that were designed to be seen from as far away as possible. He wanted travelers and enemies and anyone approaching his territory to see what was waiting for them if they crossed him, and the numbers were not small. We are talking about forests of impaled bodies. Thousands of people at a time. One Ottoman account describes an army approaching Vlad's territory and encountering a field of impaled bodies stretching for miles. Thousands of stakes. Thousands of bodies. The smell alone was enough to make hardened soldiers stop in their tracks. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the guy who had conquered Constantinople just a few years earlier. One of the most powerful and battle-hardened rulers in the world. He saw what Vlad had done and he turned his army around and went home. Yeah. The man who conquered Constantinople looked at what Vlad had created and decided, you know what, not today. That is how terrifying Vlad's reputation was, and he was not just doing this to enemies. He impaled criminals. Corrupt officials. People who cheated in business. People who he felt were dishonest or disloyal. He had a very strict, if completely insane, code of order that he enforced through absolute terror. There is a famous story about a golden cup that Vlad placed in the center of a public square in his capital city. The cup was there for anyone who was thirsty to drink from. And nobody, not a single person in the entire time Vlad ruled, ever stole that cup, because everyone knew what happened to thieves in Vlad's Wallachia, that he was a monster. But he was a monster with a system. And in a brutally chaotic time and place, that system worked pretty wild, right? Grimacing face. The fight against the Ottomans. So here is the thing that most people do not know about Vlad the Impaler. Yeah, he was terrifying. Yeah, he did things that are genuinely hard to read about. But he was also one of the most effective military leaders of his entire era. And his fight against the Ottoman Empire is genuinely one of the most incredible military stories of the 1400s. That the Ottoman Empire in the mid-1400s was the most powerful military force on the planet. They had just conquered Constantinople in 1453, ending the Byzantine Empire that had lasted for over 1,000 years. They were expanding into Europe. They were unstoppable, except Vlad stopped them. When Sultan Mehmed II demanded that Vlad pay tribute, basically pay money to the Ottomans as a sign of submission, Vlad refused. Flat out refused. And then he went on offense. In the winter of 1461 to 1462 Vlad launched a massive raid into Ottoman territory along the Danube River. He hit town after town. He burned everything. He killed everyone who resisted. The numbers in his own reports to the Hungarian king, which he sent along with bags of noses and ears as proof, suggested he killed over 23,000 people in that campaign alone. That he literally sent bags of noses and ears to prove his kill count. That is the kind of guy we are talking about. The Sultan was furious. He put together one of the largest armies he had ever assembled, some estimates say 90,000 soldiers, and marched on Wallachia to destroy Vlad once and for all. And Vlad, with a force that was massively outnumbered, did not just sit there and wait to get crushed. That he used guerrilla tactics. He poisoned wells. He burned crops so the Ottoman army could not feed itself. He drove diseased cattle into Ottoman camps. He used the terrain of Wallachia, the forests, the mountains, the rivers, like a weapon, and then came the night attack. On the night of June 16, 1462 Vlad led a surprise night raid directly into the Ottoman camp with a relatively small force. The goal was simple and absolutely insane: kill the Sultan personally. End the war in one night by cutting off the head of the entire Ottoman army. He did not get the Sultan. But he came close enough to cause absolute chaos. The Ottoman camp was thrown into complete panic. Thousands of soldiers died in the confusion. The Ottomans were fighting each other in the dark because nobody knew where the attack was coming from, and then Vlad melted back into the darkness. The Sultan pushed forward into Wallachia anyway. And that is when his army encountered the thing that made even hardened Ottoman soldiers lose their nerve: the forest of the impaled. Vlad had impaled around 20,000 Ottoman prisoners and enemy soldiers and set them up in a massive forest of stakes outside his capital city. The Sultan's army walked right into it. Thousands of bodies. The smell. The silence. The sheer scale of what one man had done. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, reportedly wept when he saw it. Not from sadness. From something closer to shock and horror, and maybe even a little bit of genuine fear. And then he turned around and went home. Vlad the Impaler, with a tiny army and zero chance of winning a straight fight, had scared off the most powerful military force in the world. That is not nothing. That is actually incredible. Flexed biceps. The betrayal by his own brother. Okay, so Vlad basically just pulled off one of the greatest military defense operations in European history. He held off the Ottoman Empire with a fraction of their numbers. He used fear as a weapon more effectively than almost anyone before or since. He should have been celebrated as a hero across all of Christian Europe. Instead, he got betrayed. Again, and the person who betrayed him this time was the last person you would expect: his own brother. Radu. Remember Radu, the younger brother who was also taken as an Ottoman hostage when they were kids? Well, Radu had a very different experience in Ottoman captivity than Vlad did. While Vlad came out hardened and full of rage and hatred for the Ottomans, Radu actually adapted. He learned the language. He converted to Islam. He became close with the Sultan himself. And he became an Ottoman military commander. Yeah. Same parents. Same captivity. Completely opposite outcomes. While Vlad was out there fighting the Ottomans with everything he had, his own brother was leading Ottoman forces against him. After the Sultan turned his main army around and went home, he left Radu behind with a significant force and a mission. Go find your brother. Take the throne. Make Wallachia an Ottoman ally. And Radu was good at his job. He knew Wallachia. He knew the people. He knew how to talk to the nobles and the local population who were honestly exhausted and terrified from years of Vlad's brutal rule that he promised them something Vlad never could. Peace. Stability. A life without constant fear of being impaled for the smallest infraction, and slowly, noble by noble, town by town, people started switching sides. Vlad found himself losing the political ground under his feet even as he kept winning military battles. He pulled back to his mountain castle at Poenary, the one he had rebuilt with the forced labor of those Easter dinner nobles, and then came a moment that is one of the most dramatic in his entire story. His own wife, or possibly a mistress, accounts differ, reportedly threw herself from the castle walls into the river below rather than be captured by the approaching Ottoman forces. Vlad escaped through the mountains with a small group of loyal followers that he had fought off the greatest empire in the world. He had used tactics that military historians still study today. He had made the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire turn around and go home, and he lost anyway, because the knife in the back always hurts more than the sword in the front. Pensive face. Prison, return and the final mystery. Alright, so Vlad escapes through the mountains. He is running. He has lost his throne. His brother is sitting in his seat. His country is basically an Ottoman ally now. And he has nowhere to go. He goes to Hungary. To King Matthias Corvinus, the son of John Hunyadi, looking for support and military help to take back his throne, and King Matthias throws him in prison. Yeah. He goes to his supposed ally for help and ends up in a cell. The exact reasons are complicated and historians still debate them. Some say Matthias got letters, possibly forged, suggesting Vlad had been making deals with the Ottomans behind his back. Some say Matthias just found Vlad too unstable and too dangerous to let run around loose. Some say it was pure politics. Matthias needed a reason to not go to war with the Ottomans and locking up Vlad gave him one. Either way, Vlad spent roughly 12 years in Hungarian captivity. From around 1462 to 1474. Now here is something interesting about those 12 years. Vlad was not treated terribly in Hungarian captivity. He was kept as a high-status prisoner. He had relative comfort. And reportedly, he could not stop impaling things. Yeah. Even in prison. He would reportedly catch mice and birds and impale them on little tiny stakes. He just could not help himself. Whether that story is true or exaggerated we do not know for certain. But the fact that people were telling that story says everything about the reputation he had built. Eventually Matthias released him. Vlad converted back to Catholicism. He had briefly converted during his captivity, and he was even allowed to marry a relative of the Hungarian royal family. He remarried. Had kids. Started to rebuild something like a normal life, and then in 1476, after 12 years of captivity, he got his throne back one more time, his third reign. His last chance. It lasted about 2 months. In late 1476 or early 1477, the exact date is not known. Vlad the Impaler was killed. He was ambushed. Possibly by Ottoman forces. Possibly by Wallachian noble rivals. Possibly by a combination of both. Some accounts say he was killed in battle. Some say he was assassinated. Some say he was actually killed by his own men by accident in the chaos of a fight. Nobody knows for sure. His head was reportedly cut off and sent to Constantinople where the Sultan had it displayed publicly just to prove to everyone that Vlad the Impaler was finally dead, and just like that, one of the most terrifying men who ever lived was gone. He was somewhere between 45 and 50 years old. He had ruled 3 times. Survived Ottoman captivity, political exile, prison, and decades of enemies trying to destroy him, and in the end, nobody even knows exactly where he is buried. The most feared man in Europe just vanished. Ghost. How he became Dracula the vampire. Okay, so now we get to the really fun part. How on earth does a brutal 15th century Romanian prince turn into a cape-wearing vampire with fangs who is scared of garlic and sunlight? The journey from Vlad the Impaler to Count Dracula is actually a really fascinating story in itself. And it involves a writer named Bram Stoker who had never even been to Romania. So after Vlad died his story did not just disappear. In fact it spread fast. German pamphlets printed in the late 1400s and early 1500s, some of the earliest printed materials in European history, were absolutely full of stories about Vlad. Woodcut illustrations of his impalement scenes. Dramatic stories about his cruelty. His brutality became basically the first viral content in European history. People could not get enough of the horror stories about him. The Ottomans spread their own versions of his story. The Germans spread theirs. Russian accounts of Vlad painted him as both a monster and, weirdly, an example of harsh but effective justice. Over the centuries the stories kept circulating. Getting more dramatic. More supernatural. In Eastern European folklore the idea of the vampire was already very much alive. The concept of the dead rising and feeding on the living was a genuine folk belief in many parts of Romania and surrounding areas, and somewhere in the cultural imagination those two things started to merge. The terrifyingly brutal historical figure and the supernatural blood-drinking monster of local folklore. Then came Bram Stoker. Stoker was an Irish writer living in London in the late 1800s. He had been working on a vampire novel for years. He was doing research in a library in Whitby, England when he came across a book about Wallachian history that mentioned Vlad Dracula. He loved the name. He loved the history. He took the name Dracula, son of the dragon, and attached it to his vampire character. Now here is something people get surprised by. Stoker's Count Dracula is not really based closely on Vlad the Impaler. The character lives in Transylvania. Vlad actually ruled Wallachia, which is a different region. The vampire mythology Stoker used came from various European folk traditions, not specifically from Vlad's story, but the name. The name Dracula. That came directly from the real historical figure, and when the book came out in 1897 it became a sensation. And then came the movies. Bela Lugosi in 1931. Christopher Lee. Gary Oldman. And suddenly Dracula was everywhere. One of the most recognized fictional characters on the planet, all of it growing out of the name of a real man. A real brutal terrifying historical figure who impaled his enemies and scared off the Ottoman Empire and got betrayed by his own brother and died in mysterious circumstances in a snowfield somewhere in Romania. The vampire version is scary, but the real guy was something else entirely. Vampire. Was he a monster or a hero? So here is the question that historians and Romanian people still debate today. Was Vlad the Impaler a monster? Or was he something more complicated than that? Because here is the thing, in Romania Vlad is not universally seen as a villain. Not even close. For a lot of Romanian people he is actually considered a national hero. A defender of his people against the overwhelming power of the Ottoman Empire. A man who did what needed to be done in an impossibly brutal time and place. And look, that perspective is not crazy. Think about the context. Wallachia in the 1450s and 1460s was a tiny kingdom surrounded by enemies. The Ottoman Empire to the south. Hungary to the north. Internal rivals constantly scheming. And the Ottomans were actively trying to conquer and absorb everything in their path. Vlad held them off. With limited resources and a small army he used tactics, brutal horrifying tactics, that actually worked. He kept Wallachia independent. He made the Sultan of the most powerful empire in the world turn around and go home. In a time when the rules of war were completely different from what we know today. When massacres were common. When brutality was standard. When every ruler was doing terrible things to maintain power, Vlad did terrible things and actually succeeded. Does that make it okay? No. Absolutely not, but does it make him purely a cartoon villain with no complexity? Also know that he was a man shaped by trauma. Taken from his family as a child. Held as a hostage. Watched his father and brother get killed in the most horrific ways. Came back to a kingdom in chaos and used the only tools he believed actually worked, fear and absolute brutal force, to try to hold it together. He was also genuinely cruel in ways that went beyond any military or political necessity. The sheer scale of the suffering he caused. The creativity he brought to methods of punishment. The way he seemed to enjoy the theater of terror. He was both things at once. A defender and a monster. A patriot and a sadist. A brilliant military tactician and a man who impaled mice in prison because he literally could not stop himself. History is full of people like that. People who did real good and real evil at the same time. People who cannot be fit neatly into hero or villain boxes. Vlad the Impaler is just one of the most extreme examples of that kind of person that history has ever produced, and honestly, that is exactly what makes him so fascinating. Thinking face. Alright, so here is where we land. Vlad Dracula was real. The brutality was real. The trauma that shaped him was real. And the legacy he left behind, both the historical one and the fictional one, is one of the most remarkable in all of human history. A boy taken hostage at 12 years old. A prince who lost his throne twice and won it back twice. A military commander who scared off the Ottoman Empire with nothing but terror and tactics. A man so brutal that his name became synonymous with monsters for 600 years, and somewhere in a field in Romania, in a location nobody has ever definitively identified, his body is still out there. No grave marker. No tomb. No final resting place that anyone can point to and say, here. This is where the real Dracula lies, that he came out of the darkness. He ruled through darkness. And he disappeared back into it. The vampire version sleeps in a coffin waiting to be found. The real Vlad Dracula is still lost, and somehow, that is the scariest thing about him. Oncoming fist fire.